So we're going to talk about medical bills and what happens to bills after you get medical care. So say we have a patient who had to go to the hospital. Maybe that patient had a herniated disc and that disc was fixed, and he goes home and then walks to the mailbox one day, and in the mailbox comes this medical bill. If you've ever seen a medical bill, they can look really kind of confusing and intimidating. You have line items of all these things that could happen in the hospital. Hard to make sense of that. But let's try to go ahead and do that. Well, first of all, let's consider what's on this bill. So maybe if you took a pill, that'll be on the bill. Perhaps our patient had some X-rays as well, and so those will appear on the bill. In addition to the X-rays, our patient was probably cared for by a nurse, who took blood pressures and kind of checked our patient periodically. Maybe our patient also had to stay in a hospital bed for a few nights, so that's going to also be added to the tab. All these things are going to deal with the hospital-based care and all those items that can occur. And then there's also going to be doctors that see our patients. So maybe there'll be an internist who kind of comes in, listens to our patient's heart and lungs. We're going to have a neurosurgeon who has to actually remove that herniated disc. So we'll just consider that there's all these little things, and they all appear on that hospital bill, and each of those is going to be given a price and is going to be listed individually. And this is sort of the essence of what's referred to as a fee-for-service system. Every little thing on there gets a little price. Well, now how do we actually ultimately really pay for this? And so I'm going to sort of explore this in a couple of options. The first method might be if our patient had Medicare, the government program that offers medical insurance and pays for medical care, usually for the older population. On the other hand, our patient could also have private insurance, and so we'll talk about how that would handle this bill as well. Let's go ahead and first start with Medicare. And right off the bat, Medicare does something very helpful in simplifying these bills. They take all of those goods and services that are part of just the hospitalization. Maybe the cost of the bed, the cost of nursing care, people that move you around in wheelchairs, maybe some of the medicines, x-rays, and they bundle all that together into what's called a diagnosis related group, or a DRG. That's essentially a bundle of services, and it depends on what's wrong with the patient. So every medical problem, like maybe you had a baby, or you broke your leg, or like this patient, you had back surgery to take out a herniated disc, there's a certain price that's assigned to that, and that's supposed to cover everything that's done to you in the hospital. So I don't know, so I'm just going to make this up. Suppose for having a disc surgery, that's like $3,000. That's a fixed price that Medicare has set. That's how much they're going to pay. That also, to be clear, I'm just going to put this in green, that part of Medicare that covers the hospital DRG is called Part A of Medicare. Now you'll notice that didn't include the doctor, so let's talk about how they're paid for. And to be honest, it's actually kind of a little weird and kind of interesting. Well, in the 1980s, a group of people got together and they made a list. I'm just going to draw a little book here of all the different things doctors can actually do. I mean, like read x-rays, do surgery, read an electrocardiogram, set a broken bone. They made a list and they made this book, and they listed almost 8,000 different things doctors could do. And they gave each of those things based on the difficulty of doing it and how much training it was, how much time. Each of those was assigned a number called a relative value unit. In other words, if you read a chest x-ray, that was given a relative value unit of 0.2 if you were a doctor. If you did a colonoscopy, that was given a relative value unit of, say, 6. If you talked to a patient for a while and explained something to them, that's called the Evaluation and Management Code. A certain type of visit, you might get 2 RVUs for that. And all the way down the list, as I said, to almost 8,000 different things doctors could do. Well, so as you said, well, how do they come up with that bill? So they actually take every little service your doctor did. They take all those little things, like maybe you had surgery, maybe they did a colonoscopy, maybe they had to read a chest x-ray. All those services, they add them all up and you get the total number of RVUs from that hospitalization. They take that number, they multiply it by something called the conversion factor, which is approximately $40. And so they take all the RVUs, they multiply by the conversion factor, and that gives you your doctor's bill. That doctor's bill, I'm going to put it in green here, is typically paid for by Medicare Part B. So generally speaking, if you go to the hospital, there's going to be Medicare is going to take care of that bill, pay a DRG to cover Part A, the hospital services, and then pay your doctor as well. And then as a patient, you'll have to pay some percentage of what's left. And so as a patient, you'd have to then pay a copay along with that. But one of the really nice things about Medicare is that by bundling services together like this, by assigning value to the physicians, there's nothing for patients to worry about in terms of bargaining for prices. The prices are fixed. So I want to point that out very clearly, that with Medicare, there are no negotiations between the hospitals and the federal government. Because Medicare is such a huge buyer of all those medical goods and services, they kind of just set their prices and doctors take them. It's often one of the cheapest ways to get medical care because Medicare has very low prices. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about private insurance. Suppose our patient got private health insurance. Well, it's kind of similar. Private health insurance also have these bundles of DRGs. They also have physician prices. But the key thing about private insurers is that unlike Medicare, which has fixed prices, almost doesn't matter where you go, the private insurer has to make an agreement with the hospital and doctors. They have to negotiate and create a contract for services. So you can imagine what that leads to. If you have to make a contract, you can get very different contracts between your insurer and the hospital depending on where you live. Let me explain it in this way. Suppose you live in an area where there's like lots of hospitals. So I'll just say there's 3 hospitals in the area where the patient lives and where the insurance company, the private insurance company, does business. So that insurance company may go to those 3 hospitals and say, well, we want to get your business. Let's negotiate some prices. How much are you going to charge us for all this list of goods and services? And so this hospital may say, okay, we'll charge you a lot. This hospital says, hey, no, we want some business. We're going to charge a little bit. And this one says, yeah, we want some business too. We're going to charge a little bit. Look at what's happened. Because of that competition, the overall price that is negotiated is going to be lower. Not only that, the insurer is going to say, well, oh, these are the hospitals we want our patients to go to. So what we've done is we've created a network. So if you are a patient and you need that disc surgery, you go to a hospital in your network. And then your insurer, who has made these special deals, gets the discounted price for those surgeries. Hopefully it's a good price. On the other hand, if you go out of network to this hospital, that's going to be a higher price, and your insurance company is going to say, we're not going to pay for that. We never made a deal with them. You're on your own. So with insurance companies, you have to stay in network, and the reason they make those networks is so they can try to negotiate good prices. Now, here's the thing, though. Maybe there's only one hospital, and you live in a remote area. You can't negotiate with just one hospital. They'll say, you don't want your patients to come here? Forget it. Where are you going to take them? You got to pay those high prices. So with private insurers, the price you pay will vary a lot. So New York City might have very, very different prices than Massachusetts, may have very, very different prices than California, may have very, very different prices than Oregon. It all depends on the size of the private insurer, the amount of competition, and what kind of deal they can get. And that's why you get all these issues where you have networks, and private insurers are very clear about where you can and can't go. We've talked about both Medicare as well as private insurers, but let's not forget there's a third category as well, and those are people who are uninsured, or they pay all their expenses out of pocket. What happens to them? Well, they actually have the hardest and worst deal of all. Remember how we talked about how you have all these little prices here? Medicare and private insurers bundle a lot of that together, and they have these sort of negotiated prices. Uninsured people have none of that. So that bill you get a list. Every single line has a different price. And not only that, those prices can be very high because hospitals have often just made those up. Those prices are listed in something called a charge master. And that charge master is the master list of prices, and they're very high. It can be like $8 for a pill of Tylenol, like $100 for an x-ray, and all those charges get added up into a big bill. One of the great difficulties of being uninsured is not only do you not have an insurance policy that covers you, but the actual prices you pay are very, very high compared to private insurers and Medicare. So the highest prices are paid by the uninsured. So I'll draw that up here. The lowest prices are paid by people on Medicare, and private insurers are somewhere in between. Anyway, that is a little bit of an introduction to what happens to your medical bill.